Top 10 Fascinating Facts About Joseph the Dreamer. Today, we'll take you on a journey through time to explore the top 10 fascinating facts about Joseph the Dreamer. Get ready to uncover hidden secrets and astonishing revelations that challenge what you thought you knew about one of the most intriguing figures of antiquity. Number 10. A bridge between cultures. Joseph, a Hebrew, arrived in Egypt as a slave but, through an extraordinary twist of divinely orchestrated events, rose to become the governor of the nation, second only to the Pharaoh. His arrival in Egypt marked the beginning of a series of cultural, economic, and spiritual interactions that would shape the future of his own family and the Egyptian people. Joseph introduced grain management policies that not only saved Egypt from severe famine but also attracted people from other nations, including his own family, in search of food. This proactive crisis management not only showcased Joseph's wisdom and administrative skill but also set a precedent for resource planning and management in times of scarcity. Besides his economic contributions, Joseph's stay in Egypt served as a catalyst for spiritual and cultural interaction between the Hebrews and Egyptians. Through Joseph, the Egyptians could witness an example of Hebrew faith and practices, while Joseph, and later his family, were exposed to the customs, religion, and administrative practices of Egypt. Number 9. Joseph and the Pharaoh. Joseph's story with the Pharaoh begins with two troubling dreams that the Egyptian monarch could not interpret. These dreams, filled with symbolism about 7 fat cows eaten by 7 lean cows and 7 full and healthy ears of grain consumed by 7 thin and wind-blasted ears, baffled all of Egypt's wise men. The failure to find a satisfactory interpretation led the Pharaoh to seek help beyond his traditional court, at which point Joseph, recommended by the chief cupbearer whom Joseph had accurately interpreted a dream for while in jail, enters the scene. Joseph's interpretation of the Pharaoh's dreams as 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine not only demonstrated his divine connection but also his administrative acumen. He proposed a plan to store surplus during the years of plenty to prepare for the years of scarcity, a strategy that deeply impressed the Pharaoh. This encounter not only saved Egypt from catastrophe but also marked the beginning of Joseph's extraordinary rise, from a slave to the position of vizier, second after the Pharaoh. This promotion was recognition not just of his ability to interpret dreams but also of his administrative vision and leadership. Number 8. The encounter with his brothers. After years of separation and suffering, Joseph's encounter with his brothers unfolds under extraordinary circumstances. At this point in the story, Joseph has risen to become the governor of Egypt, second in command after the Pharaoh, in charge of distributing grain during a period of intense famine. His brothers, not recognizing him, come to Egypt in search of food, mired in desperation and guilt for what they had done years earlier. Joseph, recognizing his brothers, faces a whirlwind of emotions: pain from the past, surprise at their presence, and the opportunity for vengeance or forgiveness. However, he decides to test their character before revealing his identity. He subjects them to several trials, including falsely accusing them of espionage and theft, and demands that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt as proof of their honesty. The emotional climax comes when Joseph can no longer contain his emotion and reveals himself to his brothers. His statement, "I am Joseph," followed by the question, "Is my father still alive?" is a moment of deep vulnerability and humanity. The revelation overwhelms his brothers, who are initially stunned and fearful of potential revenge. However, Joseph reassures them with words of forgiveness and comfort, attributing the events of his life to a divine plan to save lives. Number 7. Falsely accused and imprisoned. After being sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph found favor in Egypt in the service of Potiphar, a high-ranking official of the Pharaoh. Joseph quickly distinguished himself by his diligence and capability, earning Potiphar's total trust, who entrusted him with the management of his entire household. However, This position of trust and privilege soon tested him in a way he never imagined. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's appearance and character, attempted to seduce him. Joseph, maintaining his integrity and loyalty to both Potiphar and God, firmly rejected her advances, saying, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" In the book of Genesis chapter 39 verse 9, in a twist of events triggered by the rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him before her husband of trying to rape her. Potiphar, without thoroughly investigating the accusations and probably feeling betrayed and compelled to act because of his wife's social position, sent Joseph to prison. What is remarkable about this story is how, even in prison, the presence and favor of God continued to be evident in Joseph's life. The Bible narrates that the Lord was with Joseph and extended his mercy to him, leading the prison warden to trust him and put all the prisoners under his responsibility. This pattern of favor and success, even in the darkest circumstances, not only testifies to Joseph's unbreakable faith and impeccable character but also demonstrates God's sovereignty and providence. The false accusation and subsequent imprisonment of Joseph illustrate a profound truth about the nature of trials and injustice, that even when we are misunderstood, slandered, or suffer unjustly, we are not alone or abandoned. God is with us amid our trials, working behind the scenes to fulfill His divine purposes and transform what seems to be a curse into a blessing. Number 6. Visionary economic strategist. At a critical moment in Egypt's history, the Pharaoh had two disturbing dreams that none of his wise men could interpret. It was then that the royal cupbearer, remembering how Joseph had accurately interpreted his dream while both were incarcerated, recommended him to the Pharaoh. Joseph not only interpreted the dreams as predicting 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, but also advised the Pharaoh to take proactive measures to avert the disaster. What is remarkable about Joseph's proposal was not just the interpretation of the dreams but his detailed plan to confront the upcoming crisis. He suggested collecting and storing 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 years of plenty. This grain would be carefully guarded in selected cities and used during the years of famine to feed not only Egypt but also others who would come in search of food. Under the Pharaoh's authority, Joseph was appointed to oversee this plan, effectively becoming the governor of Egypt. During the years of plenty, grain was collected and stored in massive quantities. When the years of famine arrived, Egypt was prepared. Joseph's vision not only ensured Egypt's survival during the famine but also allowed the country to sell grain to neighboring nations, turning Egypt into a center of aid and trade amid the crisis. Number 5. Attempted murder survivor. The conflict begins when Joseph, the favorite of his father Jacob, receives a coat of many colors, a gift symbolizing his father's preference and triggering jealousy among his brothers. Their envy intensifies even further after Joseph shares his dreams, which prophesies that he would one day reign over them, symbolized by his brothers' sheaves of wheat bowing to his own, and the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing to him. Seeing in Joseph not only their father's favorite but also someone who presumably intends to have dominion over them, his brothers conspire to get rid of him. The original plan was to kill him. Joseph is sent by his father to check on his brother's well-being and the livestock. Upon seeing him approach, his brothers say, "Here comes the dreamer. Now, come, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns, and we'll say, 'A wild beast devoured him.'" In the book of Genesis chapter 37 verses 19 to 20. This critical moment reflects not only the climax of their envy and hatred but also the lowest point in their fraternal relationship. However, Reuben, the eldest brother, intervenes, suggesting instead of killing him, to throw him into an empty cistern in the desert, secretly planning to rescue him later. This act of Reuben marks the beginning of divine intervention in Joseph's story, though he was unaware of it at the time. Eventually, instead of leaving Joseph to die, his brothers decide to sell him as a slave to a caravan of Ishmaelites heading to Egypt. This change of plans not only saved Joseph's life but also was the first step towards his eventual rise to power in Egypt, where he would later have the opportunity to save numerous people, including his own family, from a severe famine. Number 4. The coat of colors. The colorful coat was a gift from Jacob to his son Joseph, who was one of his younger sons at the time. This gift is significant because it represented Jacob's favoritism towards Joseph, born out of his love for Rachel, Joseph's mother, who was Jacob's most beloved wife. In ancient cultures, giving such a garment was not a trivial act. It implied special honor and recognition. In Joseph's case, the coat symbolized his father's high esteem and special love, inevitably causing jealousy and resentment among his brothers. The giving of this coat to Joseph exacerbated the already existing tensions in the family. His brothers interpreted the gesture as a sign that Jacob had chosen Joseph over them, not only to receive his affection but possibly to succeed him as the family leader. This perceived favoritism was the catalyst that drove his brothers to conspire against him, culminating in their decision to sell Joseph as a slave. Thus, the coat of colors becomes a symbol of familial dissent and conflict. Number 3. Unconditional forgiveness to his brothers. After years of separation and suffering, marked by the betrayal of his brothers who sold him into slavery, Joseph finds himself in an unparalleled position of power in Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh. Despite the betrayal and pain caused by his own brothers, Joseph chooses a path of reconciliation and forgiveness instead of vengeance. When he finally reveals himself to his brothers, who had come to Egypt in search of food during a time of great famine, Joseph is overcome with emotion. His response to this encounter reveals the essence of biblical forgiveness. "Now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. And now, it was not you who sent me here, but God." In the book of Genesis chapter 45 verse 5, this moment is crucial not only for the act of forgiveness itself but also for Joseph's perspective on the events of his life. He recognizes a divine providence in his sufferings, seeing how God transformed his brother's evil acts into an opportunity to save lives during the famine. Joseph's ability to forgive is based on his understanding that his experiences were part of a larger plan, meant not only for his own growth but also for the salvation of many people. Number 2. From slave to governor of Egypt. The story begins with Joseph being sold as a slave by his own brothers, who envied his special relationship with their father and his ability to interpret dreams. Despite this betrayal, Joseph did not lose faith. In Egypt, he became a slave to Potiphar, a high-ranking official of the Pharaoh. The Bible recounts how God's presence with Joseph allowed him to prosper in everything he did, earning the trust and respect of Potiphar until a false accusation landed him in prison. Even in jail, Joseph's faith and his ability to interpret dreams set him apart. He correctly interpreted the dreams of two fellow prisoners, which eventually led to his release and rise. 2 years later, the Pharaoh had disturbing dreams that no one in his court could interpret. Remembering Joseph's ability, the Pharaoh's cupbearer, whom Joseph had helped in prison, recommended Joseph to the Pharaoh. Joseph's interpretation of the Pharaoh's dreams, predicting 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, and his plan to manage the crisis demonstrated not only his divinely inspired wisdom but also his capacity to plan and manage resources on a large scale. Impressed, the Pharaoh appointed Joseph governor over Egypt, giving him authority over all the land to execute his food conservation plan. Number 1. Dream interpretations that changed the course of history. Joseph, sold as a slave by his own brothers and taken to Egypt, found his way from the dark confines of a prison to the bright halls of the Pharaoh's palace, thanks to his ability to decipher the hidden meaning behind enigmatic dreams. In a time when dreams were considered divine messages, Joseph's ability to accurately interpret them was seen as a direct bridge to divine wisdom. The most significant event unfolds when the Pharaoh of Egypt, disturbed by two seemingly perplexing dreams, desperately seeks an interpretation. In the first, 7 fat cows were devoured by 7 lean cows. In the second, 7 full and healthy ears of grain were devoured by 7 thin and scorched ears of grain. The inability of Egypt's wise men and magicians to provide a satisfactory explanation eventually leads to Joseph's summons. With a blend of humility and confidence, Joseph reveals that both dreams are, in fact, the same message. 7 years of great abundance in Egypt would be followed by 7 years of famine so severe it would make all previous prosperity forgettable. What distinguishes Joseph is not only his ability to interpret the dreams but also his wisdom in advising on the course of action. He proposes a plan to store much of the harvest during the years of abundance to ensure survival during the years of famine. This advice not only saved Egypt from disaster but also consolidated the Pharaoh's power, ensured the nation's economic and political stability, and established Joseph as a figure of immense power and influence. Beyond these earthly consequences, Joseph's interpretation of the dreams is a testament to faith and divine providence, showing how God can use adverse circumstances and individual skills to fulfill his